one of the most influential yet overlooked stories in the Old Testament is what we're going to be talking about today in episode 39 of the Deep Dives.
Very good. Sorry, Josh, didn't mean to talk over you there, but it sounds...
No, that's perfect.
Sounds
Yeah.
interesting.
I don't have to be the only one that talks in the intro.
It works well that way. But here we are again, episode...
Episode 39, yeah.
Wow,
and
39.
So the elephant in the room, though, last episode, the audio quality on it was just absolutely horrid. Almost
progressively
to the point,
getting worse.
Yeah, and as we've been reconfiguring the studios and switching out equipment, the deep dives, we're trying to acquire equipment so that we can be sort of a self-contained podcast, just in case the studio's being used or my schedule conflicts, like next week or whatever. We don't necessarily have to be bound to this studio.
Yeah.
We can have all of our own equipment. And so we've been slowly incorporating some of that equipment into our workflow here and tweaking the settings and everything. And so that audio has been a thorn in our side for a little bit. And last week our levels were completely off.
Right.
And the audio was horrible. Hopefully that's fixed in some way today. We still have an issue with the switcher that switches the video. It's bringing in a slight hiss in the background.
Right. Okay.
And then the music doesn't fade on the recording, even though we're fading it on the board. So we're slowly progressing through all that stuff. These podcasts are sort of independent productions in Marcus Point. So we're kind of left to our own
That's true.
our own debugging and our own production team and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Donna told me that we sounded like we were underwater last week.
Yes.
With,
And that's I would say that was a kind criticism.
Right. Well, we're slowly but surely getting it fixed, but want
Yep.
our listeners and viewers to know that we are aware of the problem. You and Chris spent what time? I didn't get here until 5 minutes till 8. What time did you?
I got here about maybe 7:20.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've been tweaking it and getting it closer.
Yep.
It'll work. The more stuff that we add to the chain, the more apt we are to have problems, I guess. But in the long run, the better the quality will be.
Yeah. And more consistent.
Yeah, and more consistent.
Yep. Because that's one of the other challenges. Because so many people use this, there's no guarantee that our settings, what's been customized for our voice levels and everything, that will not exist or will or won't exist next time we use the studio. And so it's, yeah.
We're making it happen.
We're making it happen.
Yes. All right. Good. We had a good class last night in Gun Club. You talked to about the intro to the general Bible study that the church is doing, which is return to worship. Return to worship, and this is what it looks like for those watching on YouTube. Jacob Giles, one of our pastors here, developed this book, and it's really good. He actually preached last Sunday, and as always, he did a really good job. Very dynamic guy, very dynamic speaker, and dynamic guy. I don't know. He's shy. He's a shy guy.
Yeah, he does often describe himself as an introvert.
Yep. Yeah, introvert. I'll take shy away. Introvert is definitely the case, but you wouldn't know it whenever you see him or hear him preach. He's I'm an introvert as well, but it seems like many introverts don't mind speaking in public. That's really strange.
Yeah, it's funny. I've taken those, like the Myers-Briggs personality test, and for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a way of profiling your personality by taking four components of, I guess, our psyche or whatever, and describing each of those four components with a letter. And the first letter is whether you're introvert or extrovert. So the first letter of your four components is either an E or an I. And it's weird because that one is the most middle ground for me. It's like 51% extrovert, 49% introvert. But I've taken the test a couple different times, and I found that my mood at the time that I take the test, sometimes I'll get introverted, sometimes I'll get extroverted. That's how close I am to the center. So I think I'm sort of a little bit of both, just depending on what do I have to be in the context I find myself in.
Gotcha. Understood. Well, we're thankful that you're at least an extrovert enough to teach our Bible study on Wednesday night. So let's go ahead and get into that, Josh, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So we kind of have to do an abbreviated episode today, just because we lost some time tweaking our audio settings, and I have to run as well. But this past Sunday, Jacob, he gave us sort of his introduction to the Return to Praise Bible study that we've been tasked with going through over the next 6 weeks, I believe.
Right.
And he brought up a really interesting account from the Old Testament that a lot of people overlook. I mean, if you've been in church for any length of time or grew up in church, whatever, you've probably heard about this, but probably never really looked into it, the details of it. And it ended up becoming one of the most influential accounts in the Old Testament that had such influence in the history following it, that it's really something that more people need to know about, I think. And that's the legacy of Korah. Back in the early chapters of Numbers, Israel, as they're wandering through the wilderness, if you remember from our past episodes, they were tasked with a very important building project. As they were going through the wilderness, God gave them the details and specifications for how to build this tent structure called the tabernacle. And what this tabernacle was a portable dwelling place for the presence of God, because God's presence dwelled in the midst of his people. And the issue with that, though, as we've discussed before, is there's a consequence that comes with the presence of God, because God's perfect. And when we were originally created, when Adam and Eve were originally created, they were created perfect too. And so there was a compatibility there where Adam and Eve could fellowship with God in the cool of the evenings in the garden, the Bible says. So mankind, when he was perfect, was able to be in the presence of God, who was perfect. But our sin ruined that. And when we sinned, we were cast out of the garden. 2 angels were put at the entrance to the garden, and so on. And when the children of Israel were building the tabernacle, they were building a small analog of that, because God's goal has always been to restore that rift in the relationship. And so a significant part of that plan was to create this analog of God's throne and God's presence on that throne, living in the midst of his people, but also being separate from his people because of that sin. So it communicated God's desire to be with us, but it also communicated his inability to be with us because of our sin. But it also communicated God's ongoing plan to restore that relationship. And so we have the tabernacle here, which was a movable tent structure that had a very specific configuration that was dictated directly by God. There was the materials that went into making it. There was the furniture that went inside of it. There were the altars and the altar and the laver and stuff that went on the outside of it. There were the tents that surrounded the courtyard of the tabernacle, and it even went so far as to show when you move outward from the tabernacle and you're now in amongst the children of Israel, the Israelites were directed to camp in a very specific way around the tabernacle. And when you look at the 4 compass points, there were 3 tribes at each compass point, and then within the courtyard of the tabernacle, or right near the tabernacle, inside the within the camps, the exterior camps of the 12 tribes, there was that last remaining tribe of Levi, and Levi was always set apart from the rest of the tribes of Israel because they were tasked with the priesthood and the upkeep of the tabernacle, later the temple, and so on. So what we have, if you have like a drone flying over the camp of Israel, you would see a bunch of people stretched out to the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west, and then within that, around this little tent structure in the middle, you would see 4 groups of people that were distributed according to the compass points again. And inside there, so the tribe of Levi, there were 3 main families in that tribe: the family of Gershon, the family of Kohath, and the family of Merari. And these families, not all of them were priests in the sense of conducting the ceremonies of the tabernacle or performing the sacrifices. Some of these families were priests in the sense that they were charged with the mobility of the tabernacle, or the upkeep or the maintenance of the physical structure. And so when we look at those 3 families, Gershon, they were tasked with, whenever the tabernacle has to move, they pack up the tent cover, the hangings, the curtains, the cords. That's the part that they're responsible for going and taking down, folding up, transporting to the next site, and setting them up again. Merari, they were in charge of the boards that made up the sides of the tabernacle, the bars that the curtains hang from, the pillars, the sockets, the pins, the cords. I like these guys. They were kind of the structural guys. And so that kind of is near and dear to my heart as an engineer who does a lot of structural design. But and then the third family, Kohath, they were responsible for the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat that sat on top of it, the table of showbread, the candlestick that was in the tabernacle, the different altars, the vessels, the hangings that were inside the tabernacle. That's what Kohath was for. But Kohath had what was further divided in their responsibilities. So Kohath had 4 sons. There was Amram, Issachar, Hebron, and Uzziel. Amram is the father of 2 of the most famous people in the Old Testament, Aaron and Moses. Also their sister Miriam. But Amram and his wife Jochebed, their 2 sons were Moses and Aaron. And Amram's brother Issachar. So we're in that family of Kohath, and there are two of 4 brothers, Amram and Issachar. Amram, his sons was Moses and Aaron. Issachar, his sons were Korah and then 2 other guys. So we have Aaron, Moses, and Korah. Aaron and Moses are brothers. Korah is the cousin, and these are part of the family of Kohath, which is camping to the south of the tabernacle. Well, right on the other side of the curtain the border that delineates the tabernacle area from the camps of Israel, right across that was the tribe of Reuben. And so, if you can imagine it, when Korah goes outside of his tent, just on the other side of that fence, he can hear the family of Reuben and the guys over there doing their thing, and it was really easy for them to. They probably their kids probably played together, all this kind of stuff. Well, Korah and Reuben, some of the families of Reuben, as they're talking to each other and fellowshipping together and all this kind of stuff, an issue gets created they're looking at their cousin Aaron and their cousin Moses, and they're like, we're cousins. We're all the tribe of Levi. We're all part of the family of Kohath. Why is it that these two guys are the ones that get to camp at the door of the tabernacle? How come they're the ones that get to, put on the ceremonies of the tabernacle and do the sacrifices? Like, we're relegated to being glorified movers. When the tabernacle moves from one location to the other, they call us in. We pick up the ark, the table, the candlestick, the altars, the vessels, the hangings. We transport them to the new place, put them down, and we go back to our tents. And it's these guys who get to just kind of saunter along and do their little sacrifices and be the important ones that get to be all up in front of people and all this stuff. So there's a little bit of jealousy there. Like, why are our cousins elevated to this status and we're not? And so they went to Moses and Aaron and brought this issue in front of them. And so the answer was, all right, let's do an experiment. Aaron's sons, they were the ones that were tasked with being the priests who did the ceremonies, the sacrifices, all that kind of stuff. He said, let's do an experiment. We'll take the sons of Aaron, take the sons of Korah, second cousins, right? And we'll let them both come in front of the tabernacle, and they'll take incense and they'll burn it and they'll offer it as an incense offering to God, and then we'll see, what God says. Because here's the thing. Those roles weren't something that Aaron and Moses came up with. It wasn't like Aaron and Moses said, we're going to be the important ones.
Right.
Aaron was like, I'm going to make my sons all the priests. This is nepotism. Or I'm going to make my sons all that. That's not what happened. God set these roles in place.
They were appointed.
Yeah, they were appointed by God. So Korah's argument wasn't really with Aaron and Moses. He may have thought it was.
Yes.
His argument was with God. And in wisdom, Aaron and Moses didn't argue with him. They just let God argue. And so they set up this experiment. And so, it came time for the test, and the congregation of Israel gathered together, and Moses starts talking. And you would think, knowing the recent history of God, like trashing an entire nation of Egypt, parting the Red Sea, fire coming down and consuming Mount Sinai while God's giving them the law and all this stuff, you would think that Moses' speech would have struck a little bit of fear into him.
Right.
It would have me, I would think. I hope it would. But Moses is like, all right, everybody, we're going to do an experiment. The sons of Korah, or Korah, he thinks that he can be priests, and Aaron's sons are the priests. So we're doing a little experiment, and if at the end of the experiment Korah is still here, then we'll know they're right. But if for some reason they die a really weird death right now, then we'll know that they were wrong. So there's some pretty high stakes.
Yeah, no doubt. Right. Sure
and Moses even said, like, kind of added a little bit more. He's like, if the earth swallows them up, we'll know that they were wrong.
Everybody starts backing away from him.
That's exactly
right?
what happened. He's like, all right, everybody, move back, give God some room, and so that just in case they're wrong,
right?
So you won't be consumed in the process. So everybody's like backing off.
Love you, Korah, but
yeah. Well, maybe we'll see you after this is over. Go out for some coffee or something, talk about it.
We'll be over here.
Yeah. So sure enough, they offer the incense, and all of a sudden, the entire earth just opens up underneath Korah and everyone who was associated with him, and the sons of Reuben that were involved in this. Like everyone that was involved in this little controversy, this little rebellion, earth just opened up, swallowed them, closed back up, Everything is,
Oh my gosh. That's
birds tweeting,
crazy.
quiet. It's like, oh, freaked everybody out.
I'm
obviously,
sure it did.
right?
Freaks me out hearing about that.
And we think that's the end of Korah. I mean, it is the end of Korah, but it's not the end of his family or his lineage, because not everybody agreed with Korah.
All right. Okay.
In fact, there were a few sons that didn't agree with him. Namely, there's one that was named Abiasaph that didn't. We know if you look at genealogies, Abiasaph ends up becoming one of the ancestors of Samuel, who was involved with David. He was the last judge of Israel. He anointed Saul king. He anointed David king. So tremendously important figure that would not have happened had Abiasaph, one of the sons of Korah, had he bought into the rebellion that his father had started. But obviously he didn't, because he wasn't consumed in that. And there were a few other sons of Korah that escaped this as well. And you don't really read about that to any significant degree in the book of Numbers. It's not until later when you start to realize, oh, wait a second, these Korah, the line of Korah is still around, and they're really important. See, so the tabernacle was around for, I think, about 450 some odd years, something. I forget the exact number. I'm kind of shooting from the hip, but several centuries the tabernacle existed. It was a moving structure for about 40 years of the wilderness wanderings, and then a little bit when they got into Canaan. Eventually, they set up shop in Shiloh, because once Israel was in the Promised Land, there really wasn't a need for the tabernacle to move anymore. So it stayed in this little town called Shiloh, and that's where it was all throughout the time of the judges, all throughout the reign of Saul, and all throughout the reign of David, and part of the reign of Solomon. Well, when David becomes king, he was the second king of Israel. He built a big house for himself, and it dawned on him one day. He's like, I have a house, but God is sitting there in a tent that's really, really old over in Shiloh. We need to build him a house. And so he went to God with that request, and God answered and said, well, I like that. That's part of the plan, but you're not going to be the one to build it. Your son's going to be the build it. David was a wartime king. There's some things in the nation of Israel that had to be ironed out before the temple was made. But what he did say was, your son's going to build it, but you can acquire all the materials and get all the permits in place, that kind of stuff. Okay. And so David did that, and so a part of that task obviously was accumulating all the materials that would have been turned into the temple. But the other part was, well, now what do we do with these three families? I mean, it's a no-brainer what we can do with Aaron's family, because we're still going to need priests that do sacrifices and temple practices and all that kind of stuff. But what do we do with these people that are tasked with moving the temple? Because we're going to make one that's pretty non-movable. It's super, super big. Yeah. and solid. So these guys aren't going to be necessary anymore. So we need to reassign them, because they're still Levites. They're still, they didn't get a territory like the other tribes did in the land of Canaan. Right. Their inheritance was God, right. And their inheritance was being tasked with the upkeep of the temple. And so David reassigned a lot of their duties. And for example, the lineage of Korah ended up becoming musicians, and so instead of being part of this team that moves the Ark of the Covenant, moves the tables and the candlestick and all that stuff, they became temple musicians and temple singers and all that stuff. That's why in the book of Psalms, there are several times at the beginning of a psalm they'll have an intro that says, David wrote this and gave it to the sons of Korah. The reason is because David wrote the song, he gave it to the music people, and this was incorporated into their collective worship as a nation. And it's even interesting. There are some psalms that it'll start out like, this is a song of degrees, which, in a song of degrees means like, as you sing that song over and over again, as you're like perhaps on your way to the temple to worship or to offer sacrifices or whatever, you sing this, and it gains in its volume and excitement and everything because it's a song of degrees. Okay. And so if you can imagine this, an entire nation of people who are being led in worship by these sons of Korah, whose lineage involves this rebellion, it's really interesting how like the sins of this guy Korah didn't necessarily have to translate automatically to the generations that followed. There was a line that was drawn where there's like, we're not gonna follow in that rebellion. We're gonna do what God tells us to, and not only are we gonna do that, we're gonna be joyful in that task, and we're gonna honor God in that task. And so that attitude, I think, played a huge role in them becoming the temple musicians and the ones that were in charge of leading worship for the most part. And it's even interesting, those sons of Korah and their leadership in worship show itself in the history of Israel, because there was a time when Israel was being attacked by their enemies, and Jacob even alluded to this this past Sunday. They're being attacked by the enemies, and as usual, they're outgunned, they're outmanned, they're out-strategized, all this stuff. And it was looking bleak for their ability to defend themselves or to come out of this battle, not just successfully, but just survive it in general. Mm-hmm. And so the sons of Korah came out, and in advance of the armies of Israel, they just started leading worship and started praising God and worshiping God. And it was that worship that was the catalyst, and God came down and defeated Israel's enemies on their behalf. They didn't have to lift a finger. It was all praise that did that fighting. And we see that a couple times in Scripture. Remember when Paul was in prison, or no, I think it was Peter was in prison. They started praising, and the prison started rumbling, the walls broke, their chains fell off, and they were free. And things like that happen periodically throughout Scripture that show the importance of praise and the importance of our attitude of worship towards God. But when you look at the family of Korah, that decision by the sons of Korah not to follow in the rebellion of their father elevated them to such a status in the Old Testament that they directly impacted not just Israel history, but world history. It were the descendants of Korah that were instrumental in David ascending to that eternal throne. It was the sons of Korah that fought that spiritual warfare in advance of the physical warfare of Israel, and preserved Israel as a result of it. Is the sons of Korah that were tasked with leading the praise and worship in the temple and leading the people in that. As a hugely important family that often gets overlooked just because we don't dig into those, I hate to say boring books of the Bible, but the parts of the Bible that a lot of people sort of get bogged down in reading. Right.
Well, I wonder how many other stories in the Bible that we could there's tons that we could dig into and pull out more information like this. It's funny that these days in recent past, musicians have been elevated in status. I mean, the musicians always get the girls, and they're very they're thought of as being celebrities, the most popular ones. So to be a musician back in the day, I wonder how it was at the beginning whenever they were appointed to be the musicians. Did they want to do that? Was it something that they kind of did begrudgingly, and how did that change with time?
Yeah.
It just makes me wonder, because music. There's nothing like music that can change an emotion so quickly.
Right.
You know, my buddy Kent was that was his love language is music, and we shared that music. We talk about music all the time, and it's just it's like a picture. And if you combine a picture in a song, it can make a grown man cry in a heartbeat. You know what I mean? That's just the power of music, and the power of one or the other can do it. But if you put both of them together, it's beyond control. You know what I mean? So I hope that they were able to embrace that role and go, I'm gonna be the best trumpet player I can be. You know what I mean? Best saxophone player I can be. Whatever.
And I don't think it's a coincidence that the longest book of the Bible is the songbook.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Sure is. That's right. Good point. Josh, thanks, man. We're at 30 minutes. Let's go ahead and cap it off right now. We'll call this a short episode, but a very good one as well. Anytime we talk about the temple, I love it. You know what I mean? It just gives you that
I tell you, man, I've been going through, I just finished I teach a Bible study on Tuesdays at a local coffee shop, and we just finished going through the book of Ezekiel, and those 9 chapters at the end that talk about the millennial temple. I've been through it before because I've taught through that book in Sunday school classes and stuff that I've taught before, but going through it after having done our series here in Gun Club about being in the presence of God, and looking at that whole story arc coming from the Garden of Eden, the tabernacle, the temple, the second temple, eventually the third temple, the millennial temple, all these things. It was mind-blowing to have the details of the last 9 chapters of Ezekiel kind of superimposed on top of that. It's something I'd like to get into eventually in our Bible study on Wednesday nights.
Sounds good. Josh, thanks. Chris, thanks for being here. Appreciate it, and we'll see, and we'll see everybody next week.
Cool.
All right, sound good.